Hi, welcome back to Serger Tip Clips. I really like chain stitching, not just for practical purposes, but also as a decorative technique. And I think you've seen videos that I've done on Instagram and Facebook with chunky chain stitching with 2 8-weight threads in the chain looper, and it's just spectacular. But today I wanted to talk about how to get a perfect pivot using your chain stitch. And this is what I created with it. And it's really kind of cool, and it was really fun to do. It's all freeform. There are no lines that I drew on it or anything else. And I just did it as a fun exercise just to practice my pivoting with it. And there are a few tips that I wanted to pass along to you with that. Now, I did mention the chunky chain stitching with 2 8-weight threads. And for this particular technique, I do not recommend the 2 8-weights simply because they're so thick and heavy that it's really hard to get a perfect looking pivot with that. If you're going to use an 8-weight, I would use it by itself. You can try 2 12-weights. That's not quite as thick, and you might get good results with that. I have not experimented, but the one that I just showed you is done with a single 8-weight pearl cotton thread. So there are a few little tips for that, and this can be done on any brand or model serger that has cover chain stitch capability. If you have a knee lift for your machine, I suggest putting it in. But if not, it's not a big deal. You still have your presser foot lifter on the back of your machine that you can use. But I wanted to give you some tips to make that pivot look really nice, because I know when I have done it previously, I have always gotten a big loop at where I wanted to pivot, and it looked kind of yucky, and it wasn't a nice clean pivot. So there are a few tips for that, and I'll pass them along. And as I said, the first one is, if you have a knee lift, put it in. It's just keeps your hands free, allows you to maneuver the fabric more easily. But also, if you have a needle down function on your machine, engage it. My machine does have that on the screen because it is computerized. But in this technique, you will want to keep the needle down when you go to stop and pivot. And the other really important tip for this is, when you do raise the presser foot, you're only going to do it the slightest amount that you can get away with and be able to turn your fabric for that pivot. You don't want to raise the presser foot all the way with your knee lift or your presser foot lifter on the back. You're only going to bring it up a tiny bit because you don't want to open those tension discs all the way. That's what causes the slack in the needle thread, and it gives you that loop at the pivot. So if you only lift it a tiny bit, that will make a big difference. I'll give you my settings. I'm on the chain stitch. I have my needle in the center position for stitch number 32, I believe. I have the needle down engaged, and I have my stitch length on about 3.6. I find that with heavier threads, a longer stitch length looks really nice. And with 8-weight threads, I think it almost looks like little bubbles or beads on the fabric, so it's super pretty. But let's go over to the machine, take a look at it in action, and then we'll do a close-up table shot of this fabric that I created with the chain stitching. And you do notice on the back of it, I have fused a lightweight fusible interfacing. It was SF101. It's made by Pellon. You can pick it up anywhere. So let's see it in action, and I think you'll have some fun with this too. Set up. I have pearl cotton 8-weight thread in my chain looper and serger cone thread in the left overlock needle tension loop, but I have my needle in the center position with stitch number 32 on the L890. On the screen, you saw that I have the needle down position activated for that hover feature, and my stitch length is on 3.5. But that stitch length is really dependent on the look that you want and the weight of the thread that you have and what performs well on your machine. This is a freeform design. You can see I have the interfacing side up so that the decorative thread go on the fabric side, which is blue, and the orange will look great against that. And I haven't drawn any lines. It's strictly freeform. So I'll be pivoting as I go around. I also have in my knee lift, or my freehand system. And what I'm going to do is I am just going to ever so gently nudge that knee lift to raise the presser foot the minimum amount that I need in order to pivot the fabric easily. That is key to this whole technique, because if you raise the presser foot all the way, it will open up those tension discs all the way also. And that allows the thread to get a little bit slack, and you may get a little bit of a loop or a loose looking thread at that pivot point. So it does take a little bit of practice to kind of figure out that sweet spot of how high you need to lift the presser foot without getting any slack in the thread. So let's just get started. And again, we're just going to get that needle down. I'm going to put that right in the fabric, just the way you do with any cover and chain stitching technique. And let's get going on this. It's kind of fun. All right, so my needle is down. I'm just nudging that foot a little teeny bit, turning the fabric. The foot came back down, nudging it again, ever so slightly, turn, put it down. And this is where a freehand system is fantastic. It's really, really nice because you're not fussing around raising and lowering it by hand. So it's kind of a nifty feature on your machine. And I'm just taking my time. And I'll probably go all over this whole piece of fabric, but I won't have you watching the whole thing. I think, you'll have the hang of this in a very short amount of time. Do sharp angles. You can do very shallow angles. It doesn't really matter. But the whole key is don't raise that presser foot too high. And I always think it's such a pretty chain. I hate kind of cutting it because it is so pretty. So let's take a look at this, and we'll bring this over to the table for you to see as well. And you can see you have nice, clean angles on this, and you don't see any loops of threads or anything else. But I'm going to go all over this whole piece of fabric, and we'll put it on the table and take a look at it. It's just a fun thing, and believe it or not, you're going to see this come up in a future pattern. Let's look at this whole piece of cloth up close. And as you can see, I've been having a lot of fun chain stitching off camera. Now, you can see very clearly that there are no extra loops on the angles when I pivot. And that's exactly the look I'm going for. However, I have one more tip that sometimes when you pivot, it can make the stitch sort of bend over and lean over. There's no excess thread there. But the way to get around that is to take the tip of your iron and just kind of coax it back flat again so that the tip looks really perfect. And I had to do that in a few different spots. And here's one that I think I might have missed that I can just go over very quickly. But this is exactly what I'm talking about. And when I take my iron with a little bit of steam and the heat, that will make that stitch lay flat and give me that perfect point again. Here's another one that I probably missed. I think I was concentrating mainly on the center ones. But this is what it looks like. And it kind of reminds me of static or something. And I think it's really cool. So I may be tempted to put it in a frame and just hang it up just for the fun of it. Thanks for joining me today. If you have questions or comments, leave them below. I'll get back to you with an answer quickly. I would love to see what you do with your chain stitching too. Happy sewing and serging.